Okay, let's unpack this. We are jumping into a stack of sources today, doing a deep dive into a topic that's, well, absolutely central to understanding modern India, regional aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
You've shared a great collection of articles and notes with us, really focusing on how different parts of this vast country and, the groups within them have articulated their desire for autonomy, sometimes even challenging the idea of belonging to the Indian Union itself.
Yeah, and this is really about getting a shortcut kind of to understanding some of the fundamental tensions and, frankly, challenges India has navigated since independence. How do you keep a nation of such incredible diversity together?
Right.
And the sources really zero in on the tumultuous 1980s. That decade, it seems, brought many of these long-simmering issues right to a head.
Exactly. So our mission here is to pull out the most important insights from this material, like what were the root causes of these tensions? How did the Indian state respond?
And that tricky balance, right, between democratic rights letting these aspirations be voiced and the need for national unity.
Yeah, that constant push and pull. And ultimately, what can we learn from these experiences about creating unity within diversity? That's the big question.
What's fascinating right from the start, according to these sources, is India's foundational approach to diversity. The idea wasn't suppression. Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, the goal, as they put it, was a united social life without people having to ditch their distinct cultures. It was about balancing unity and diversity, meaning the nation itself wasn't supposed to negate the region.
That's a pretty significant starting point, isn't it? It feels quite different from, say, some European approaches that maybe saw diversity as more of a threat.
Absolutely. And India sort of doubled down on this by choosing democracy. That was key.
How so?
Well, democracy provides that crucial avenue, for regional aspirations to actually be expressed politically. The system itself doesn't automatically see these demands as, anti-national.
Ah, okay. So parties can actually appeal to regional identities, focus on local problems.
Exactly. Which, on one hand, definitely strengthens those regional feelings by giving them a platform.
But the flip side, I guess, is that because they can be voiced, these issues have to be listened to. They demand attention in policymaking.
Precisely. It forces the system to try and accommodate them. And that, of course, creates this inherent ongoing tension. It's always there.
I can see that. Sometimes the focus on national unity might overshadow local needs.
Or the other way around. Sometimes focusing too much on one region might make you lose sight of the bigger national picture. So conflicts over power, rights, resources, even separate existence. They're almost baked into the system when you're balancing diversity like this.
And India faced this right away, didn't it? Straight after independence.
Yeah.
You had the chaos of partition.
Huge numbers of displaced people.
The massive task of integrating hundreds of princely states.
And then that whole major, sometimes really contentious process of reorganizing the internal map of India, mostly along language lines.
Right, leading to states like Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat.
Yeah, that linguistic reorganization was a big piece early on.
But it wasn't always straightforward. I mean, the sources mention big protests against Hindi imposition, especially in Tamil Nadu.
Oh, definitely. And counter-protests for Hindi in the north, language was a real flashpoint.
And the demand for a Punjabi-speaking state. That took time, too.
It did. That led to Punjab and Haryana in 1966, after quite a struggle. And later, you got Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand carved out. Redrawing those internal borders was actually one of the first ways India tried to manage this diversity challenge, giving groups their own space, essentially.
But as the sources make clear, even that didn't solve everything. Some issues like, say, Kashmir or Nagaland were just far too complex.
Exactly. They couldn't be resolved just by drawing lines on a map, and new challenges kept cropping up.
And this kind of sets the stage perfectly for the 1980s, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The material really highlights this decade, a time when new challenges burst onto the scene, or some of those really old, stubborn problems just flared up again, but maybe with more intensity.
And we're not just talking political debates here. The sources describe long struggles, armed groups,
Government repression, sometimes.
major disruptions to normal politics, elections getting derailed. It sounds incredibly turbulent.
It was, but what's really noteworthy, and the sources stress this, is that even after all that turmoil and violence, many of these intense struggles eventually found a way forward, usually through negotiated settlements or accords reached within the Indian constitutional framework.
That's a crucial point. So it wasn't always breakdown. There was a path back, often.
Often, yes. Though the journey was frequently painful.
Let's dive into some cases. Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, where do you even start? The sources mention its special status under Article 370, before 2019, obviously.
Right, but even with that status, it saw terrible violence, cross-border terrorism, constant instability.
And the tragic displacement of people like the Kashmiri Pandits specifically mentioned.
Yeah, and to understand J&K, you really have to grasp its internal diversity. You've got Jammu mixed, but predominantly Hindu, the Kashmir Valley, mostly Kashmiri Muslims, and then Ladakh mountainous, roughly split Buddhist and Muslim, very different areas.
And the roots go way back, before 47, a princely state, the Maharaja wanting independence.
Exactly. Pakistan claiming it based on the Muslim majority. But, and this is crucial in the sources, the people themselves often identify primarily as Kashmiris, that shared culture, Kashmiriyat.
And the main popular movement then, Sheikh Abdullah's National Conference, they wanted the Maharaja out, but they were secular, linked with Congress, and opposed joining Pakistan.
Correct. Then came the tribal invasion backed by Pakistan in October 47. The Maharaja signs the instrument of accession to get India's help.
India sends troops, pushes them back from the valley, but Pakistan keeps control of a part, what they call Azad Kashmir.
Right. India takes it to the UN in 48. There's a resolution suggesting withdrawal, a plebiscite, but it never really happens.
They just get stuck.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Sheikh Abdullah becomes PM of J&K. India grants provisional autonomy via Article 370, later changed to Chief Minister, another sign of the shifting relationship.
So you've got this external fight with Pakistan, but also this really significant internal question about Kashmir's status within India.
Exactly. And two opposing views on Article 370 emerge from the sources. Outside J&K, some felt it hindered full integration and wanted it gone. But within J&K, the feeling often was that the autonomy wasn't enough, or worse, was being eroded over time.
And that sense of erosion fed into grievances, right? The unfulfilled plebiscite promise.
The feeling that Article 370 was being chipped away.
Leading to demands for greater state autonomy.
And also a sense that genuine democracy wasn't really taking a root there like elsewhere in India. Lots of allegations of interference and rigging over the years.
Politically, it sounds like a roller coaster. Sheikh Abdullah implementing reforms, then dismissed and detained in 53.
Yeah, and the leaders who followed were often seen as dependent on the center. Congress had a lot of influence until 74.
But then Sheikh Abdullah returns, after an accord with Indira Gandhi.
Yes, in 74. And his national conference wins a clear majority in 77. There's a moment of hope, it seems, for democratic politics to work.
But short-lived. His son Farooq Abdullah takes over in 82.
And is dismissed by the governor soon after, widely seen as central intervention that really damaged trust again.
And then the NC allied with Congress for the 86 election, which didn't help perceptions of interference.
Leading into the 87 election, well, the sources are pretty clear. There was a widespread belief that it was massively rigged.
Rigged against whom?
Against a coalition of opposition groups, essentially. The official NC Congress win was just not seen as credible by many. And this, combined with general discontent, it was a breaking point.
Sparking the armed insurgency by 1989.
That's what the sources indicate. Militant groups emerged, wanting a separate nation, getting support from Pakistan.
In the 1990s sound grim. President's rule, army control.
A really brutal cycle of violence. Insurgents, counterinsurgency, human rights abuses on all sides. Elections did return in 96, but the underlying issues persisted.
Even with different parties coming to power later, including that PDP-BJP coalition after 2014.
Right, that election had high turnout, but then tensions flared again. The coalition broke back to president's rule in 2018.
Which leads us right up to the major change in August 2019, the abolition of Article 370, the state becoming 2 union territories.
Yeah, the sources frame J&K and Ladakh now as living examples of plural society with diverse aspirations sought to be achieved by the act. It's clearly still evolving.
Okay, shifting gears to Punjab. The 1980s were, well, just as explosive there, if not more so.
Absolutely. The sources note how Punjab's social fabric changed after partition, and again when Haryana and parts of Himachal were carved out in 66. Punjab actually waited quite a while for its Punjabi-speaking state.
And the Akali Dal, the Sikh political party, led that Punjabi Suba movement.
They did, and after 66, Sikhs were the majority in the new Punjab state.
Politically, they formed governments, but it sounds like their position was often shaky.
Yeah, coalition governments in 67, 77. But they faced central dismissals, struggled for Hindu support, and even divisions within the Sikh community itself, with Congress often finding support among Dalit Sikhs. It was complex.
And it's against that backdrop that demands for more autonomy grew in the 70s, leading to the Anandpur Sahib Resolution.
Exactly. In 1973, it pushed for more regional autonomy, redefining center-state relations, and talked about the aspirations of the Sikh Qawm community or nation, the terms ambiguous and aiming for Bolbala, or Sikh dominance, within Punjab.
So was it seen as separatist then?
The source suggests it was mostly read as a plea for stronger federalism, but it didn't initially have huge mass appeal. However, things shifted after the Akali government was dismissed in 1980. The movement picked up steam, adding issues like water disputes.
And this is where it turns violent.
Tragically, yes. Leadership seemed to pass from moderate Akalis to more extremist factions. Armed insurgency began. Militants started using the Golden Temple complex as a base, fortifying it.
Which led to Operation Blue Star in June '84, the army action inside the temple.
Highly controversial. Militarily, it removed the militants, but the damage to the temple, the holiest Sikh shrine, it deeply wounded Sikh feelings globally, and it actually fueled the extremists.
And then just months later, October 31st, 1984.
Prime Minister Indira Gandhi assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards. Retaliation for Blue Star.
Triggering horrific anti-Sikh violence.
Especially in Delhi.
Yes, and across North India. Lasted nearly a week. The sources quote figures like over 2,000 Sikhs killed just in Delhi, and a widespread feeling that the government response was slow, inadequate, and perpetrators weren't punished.
The sources mentioned PM Manmohan Singh's apology years later, calling it a negation of nationhood.
And also the Nanavati Commission findings suggesting some attacks were systematic. Really dark chapter.
How did they even start to find peace after that?
It was incredibly hard. The new PM, Rajiv Gandhi, started talks with a moderate Akalis. This led to the Punjab Accord with Harchand Singh Longowal in July '85.
What did the accord promise? Things like transferring Chandigarh to Punjab, setting up commissions for border and water disputes, compensation for victims, maybe withdrawing AFSPA steps towards normalcy.
But it didn't just stop the violence overnight.
No, sadly. The violence, militancy, counterinsurgency, police excesses, rights violations continued for almost another decade. The Akali Dal fragmented, president's rule was imposed. The '92 election had very low turnout. It was a long, hard road.
When did things finally calm down?
Militancy was largely suppressed by the mid-'90s, but the human cost was immense. Peace really returned around then.
And the sources say the 1997 election was the first sort of normal one.
Yes, won by an Akali Dal BJP coalition.
Mm-hmm.
After that, politics in Punjab gradually shifted back towards, regular issues, economy, social change, though the memory of that decade is obviously still there.
Okay, let's move to the Northeast. The Seven Sisters. Geographically distinct, right? Big area, small population share, narrow land connection.
Right, and long borders with China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, kind of a gateway to Southeast Asia, but also quite isolated in ways.
And a lot of political change there since '47, too. Merging princely states, then creating all these new states.
Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh. Mostly carved out of Assam or upgraded from Union territories between the 60s and 80s.
And partition made it more landlocked, affecting the economy.
Yeah, that isolation contributed to neglect, unique political dynamics, and also significant demographic shifts from migration over the years. A complex mix.
The sources boil down the issues there to three main types.
Seems so. Demands for autonomy within states, movements for outright secession, and this big issue of opposition to outsiders or migrants.
Let's take autonomy first. Initially, mostly in Assam.
Yes, non-Assamese groups felt the language was being imposed. Tribal leaders felt marginalized, pushed for separation, eventually leading to demands for a tribal state.
But instead of one big tribal state.
The government created several smaller states out of Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh by '72, and upgraded others like Tripura and Manipur.
But even that didn't end autonomy demands within Assam. Groups like Bodos, Karbis, Damasas still wanted their own states.
Right, using mobilization, sometimes insurgency, and it got complicated when different groups claimed the same areas.
So how was that handled? More states.
Not always. India used its flexible federal setup, created district councils for Karbis and Damasas, an autonomous council for Bodos, giving them specific powers within Assam, trying to find solutions short of creating more full states.
Okay, then secessionist movements, more difficult. Nagaland and Mizoram are the key examples.
Yeah, and comparing them is interesting. Mizoram first. It was an autonomous district in Assam. Some Mizos felt they were never really part of India. The movement gained strength after a big famine in '59, feeling the Assam government response was poor.
And the Mizo National Front, MNF, under Laldenga, launched an armed struggle in '66.
Yes, for independence. It became a 2-decade conflict. MNF used guerrilla tactics, got support from Pakistan, sheltered in East Pakistan.
And the Indian response.
Strong security measures, sometimes repressive. The sources mention even using the Air Force, which caused huge anger and alienation. A really tough period, source says. Everyone was the loser after 2 decades.
But Mizoram had a positive outcome eventually.
Remarkably so. The source credits maturity on both sides. Laldenga came back from exile, negotiated with the Indian government, specifically Rajiv Gandhi is mentioned for steering it.
Resulting in the 1986 peace agreement.
Exactly. Mizoram got full statehood with special powers. The MNF gave up the struggle, laid down arms. Laldenga became chief minister. It's seen as a turning point. Mizoram became peaceful, made strides in development. A real success story of political settlement.
Nagaland, though, started earlier but still unresolved.
Seems that way. Fizo declared independence back in 1951, rejected settlements. Armed struggle by the Naga National Council. Some factions signed agreements later, but others didn't. The core problem, the source says, awaits a final resolution. Still ongoing.
Okay, the third issue. Movements against outsiders. This sounds like a recurring theme across the Northeast.
Very much so. Large-scale migration, some internal, some illegal from other countries, led to conflict. Locals seeing migrants as encroachers on land, competitors for jobs, political power.
Taking political and sometimes violent forms.
Yes. The Assam movement, 1979-85, is the big example. Assamese people grew deeply worried about illegal Bengali Muslim settlers from Bangladesh, fearing they'd become a minority in their own state.
And economic factors played a role too, feeling resources were drained without local benefits.
Definitely. Poverty, unemployment, despite resources like oil and tea that fueled resentment.
The movement was led by students. ASU.
Yes. The All Assam Students Union. Anti-foreigner movement demanding deportation of post-51 migrants, protesting outsider dominance, faulty voter lists.
How did they protest?
Novel methods, mass mobilization, but also, tragically, violence and disruption blockading trains, oil supplies. It paralyzed the state for years.
Until the Assam Accord in 1985, with Rajiv Gandhi's government.
Yes. An agreement to identify and deport migrants who came after the Bangladesh War started in 1971.
And the student leaders formed a political party, AGP, and won the election.
They did in 85. Promised to solve the issue, build a golden Assam.
Did the accord work?
It brought peace, changed politics, but the source says it didn't fully solve the immigration problem. The outsider issue is still sensitive in Assam and elsewhere, like Tripura, where locals became a minority, or tensions over Chakma refugees in Mizoram and Arunachal.
The source has that analogy, like people on a train.
Yeah, those who got on earlier see later arrivals as outsiders, even if they have legitimate reasons. A simple way to put a complex social dynamic.
The sources also mention a few other cases briefly. The Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu.
Right, an early important regional movement, some initial talk of a separate nation, but mostly used democratic means debate, elections to gain power.
Led by figures like Periyar, opposing Brahmin dominance, asserting regional pride against the North.
Exactly. DK, then the DMK split. Agitations over language, education. The big anti-Hindi agitation in 65 really boosted the DMK.
And they came to power in 67, and Dravidian parties have dominated since.
Pretty much. DMK, AIA, DMK. Keeping regional pride central. The source notes it as a case where strong regionalism proved compatible with nationalism overall.
Then Goa. Liberation from Portugal, then statehood.
Portugal wouldn't leave after 47. India eventually used military action in 61. Became a union territory.
But there was a complication. Merge with Maharashtra or stay separate.
Yeah. Maharashtrawadi Gomanatak Party wanted merger. United Goan Party wanted separate identity, Konkani culture.
And the center held an opinion poll, like a referendum.
Basically, yes. In 67, people voted to stay separate. Goa eventually became a state in 87. Interesting use of direct democracy there.
And Sikkim's merger. Protectorate, then full statehood.
Right. Chogyal monarch, India handled defense foreign affairs, but the Chogyal struggled with democratic aspirations of the Nepali majority.
So anti-Chogyal leaders sought India's support.
Yes. Sikkim Congress won elections in 74, wanting integration. Assembly asked for associate state status, then full integration in 75.
Confirmed by a referendum.
Yes. Popular approval was clear. Indian parliament accepted. Sikkim became the 22nd state. Some contested it, but the source says it had popular support and wasn't divisive long-term in Sikkim.
Okay, so stepping back from all these details, what's the big picture takeaway?
Well, it clearly shows India's integration story is far from over. Regional aspirations keep popping up. They constantly test how well the democratic system can handle all this diversity.
And the sources pull out some key lessons.
Definitely. Lesson 1. Regional aspirations aren't weird or bad. They're normal in diverse democracies. Nation building is ongoing.
Lesson 2. Negotiation beats suppression.
Crucially, yes, democratic negotiation is the best way. Those 80s accords, however imperfect, reduce tensions. Mizoram is the prime example of a political settlement ending separatism.
Lesson 3. Power sharing matters.
Yeah.
A lot.
Absolutely. Regions need a real slice of power, state level and nationally. Without it, you get alienation, feelings of injustice.
Lesson 4. Economics plays a big role.
Regional imbalance fuels resentment, feeling left behind, resources exploited, that drives movements, and migration, which creates its own issues.
And Lesson 5. The Constitution's flexibility was key.
Immensely. That federal system, special provisions like for J&K originally, or the Northeast, the Sixth Schedule, they were vital for tackling complex problems. That flexibility helped channel aspirations democratically, preventing more separatism.
So, Indian politics, despite the bumps, has mostly managed to accept regionalism as part of democracy.
That seems to be the main conclusion from these sources, yes.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this? I mean, diving into these examples really shows that regional aspirations aren't just a problem to be stamped out. They seem like a natural, persistent part of life in a huge, diverse democracy like India.
Yeah, and the sources really hammer home that the key isn't trying to eliminate these feelings, but how you manage them. It's about negotiation, accommodation, being flexible, making sure regions feel heard and have a stake. It's not about suppression.
The 80s were clearly rough, full of conflict, but they also led to these important accords and lessons learned. It seems like there's potential within the system to resolve even really tough challenges.
It's that constant balancing act, isn't it? Unity and diversity. Never easy.
Which brings us to a final thought. Here's where it gets really interesting for you to consider. Thinking about all this history, the struggles, the violence, the accords, the successes and failures, what do you think are the biggest ongoing challenges India faces today in managing regional aspirations? Maybe around development or resources or migration. And how could those lessons from the past, especially the difficult 80s, be applied now? Something to definitely chew on.